Oh, it was really tough for England, wasn't it? Having just started so well. Charlie, if I come to you first, there was loads to like about that start. What was it in particular which you were really impressed by?
Well, that's a good question because it was multifaceted as well. And as we've always said, where Steve Borthwick is at his best, or where Steve Borthwick teams are at his best, more accurately, is when those different facets of a performance marry up. And I think England finally got there with that, albeit they would have liked to have been, despite the conditions, they might feel that they could have been a little bit more clinical moving the ball and just finishing off a couple of try scoring chances. Maybe better field position would be sort of more fairer to say. Most impressive for me was just how they withstood South Africa's maul. They almost nullified totally South Africa's maul. That was a fantastic battle. And then a couple of times South Africa ran a really clever line-out move where they went over 15 metres and went back inside to Curtly Arenza, and Alex Mitchell was alert enough to make a fantastic tap tackle. You saw physicality from Elliot Daly with on the back of, so Laws swoops for a turnover, doesn't he, on the back of that Alex Mitchell tap tackle. Alex Mitchell was fantastic with his control, his kicking. He then, at that stage of the game, lifts a box kick for Elliot Daly to absolutely smoke Dwayne Vermeulen. Other we could go on about other aspects of its selection. I think went really well. We'll talk maybe about the timing of the replacements and the ordering of that team, but I don't think much more could have been done as far as preparing the side. So yeah, there's a few things to go at there, but I think over the overarching feeling was just how assured they were and how much conviction there was in that plan. And you don't get to 15-6 up against the world champions without that. It wasn't that it was a lucky performance. It was that so much of their preparation had come off.
All the defining moments of that first half. I mean, you've touched on one there, Daly smoking Vermeulen, but they were all, I think, all except for the break by Curtly Arenza, they were all on the English side. You think of George Martin, you think of the Laws turnovers, and then just into the second half, the Farrell drop goal, all the big defining moments of the match all seemed, and the maul disruption in the first half as well that was so key. It all seemed to be, the stars seemed to be aligning for England, but that bench that we'll chat about soon, it just killed them, didn't it?
I think it was, for me, if I had to pick one, it was probably just how accurate England's kicking game was off both 9 and 10, but more to that, how the chasers actually were so effective at getting the ball back. We were bemoaning in the warm-ups, weren't we, how England were kind of just sending up kicks and never really seemed to be in a position to actually slap the ball back or actually compete in the air, but they did that so well. I mean, it was conditions they were praying for, I think is a fair thing to say. Like when they spoke about how the conditions basically dictated their game plan, and it just so happens that is their preferred kind of game plan and the way that they want to attack teams, and it all fell into their lap in that regard. And but they actually executed that kicking game so well that I was just very impressed by that. I wonder if you had to rank where England's performance kind of sits. They had some good wins in Australia. Is it their best win, though, since that semi-final in 2019, would you say, Charles?
Well, they lost.
Best performance, I should say. Not their best win. Their best moral win.
Yes, I think it's up there with South Africa, the South Africa win in the autumn of 2021. Australian, I don't think quite the same beast as South Africa, although that Test Series win was exceptional. I'd say yes, simply because for 65 minutes they were virtually flawless. And I don't think an England team has put that sort of an immaculate stretch together in the past 4 years in such a sort of consistent short burst. Well, we've seen it in bursts, but to have such a long stretch, to have an hour stretch was it wasn't enough in the end, of course, and I'm sure Steve Borthwick and his coaches will be leading a post-mortem of that final 20 minutes and what happened. But the first hour was immensely encouraging.
Speaking of Steve Borthwick, we've got a bit of audio from him now, just from post-match, just talking about the preparation of having to cram everything into a few months as opposed to having a 4-year cycle. So here's that audio now.
As for the game plan tonight, as for how we come as a team, we're playing against a team there that's had a coaching team that's been in place since the middle of 2018. They had 18 months to the World Cup and did an incredible achievement to win the 2019 World Cup, and there's had 4 years since then of continuous development, bringing players through, and the coaching team has been really, really consistent. For us, we've had 4 months as a coaching team with the players, and I've asked the players to approach training in a different way. I've asked them to approach the way we think about the game in a different way, and to ask them to do that and the players to be willing to change, I think that's all credit to them. And because they have been willing to change, they have been willing to try some different things, and tonight was another example of that. And I'm really grateful to them for the attitude they bring every day.
Just off the back of that, I think we have to talk about the scrum and just how well that went for South Africa and how disastrously it went for England in the second half. Oxenchair came on against France and was absolutely brutal with the way that he took Dorian Aldegheri apart, wasn't he? And he repeated the trick for the second time in a week against first Dan Cole, who had scrummaged well up to that point, but then also Carl Sinclair, when Carl Sinclair came on. It's kind of, I like that Oxenchair has a personal motto that salads don't win scrums, and he certainly seemed to absolutely relish the opportunity right there. Charlie, that's got to be a bit of a concern long term, do we think, given the prop resources available to England and who's kind of coming through?
Yeah, cold hard facts are that's two World Cup campaigns that have finished with a kind of with the scrum being a area that's harmed them and has leaked penalties at vital points. I actually I can't even remember now whether it was before the tournament or during the tournament, but at one point in the last couple of months, I went down to I had a call with a couple of the England age group coaches about about this Type 5 camp that they're running and bringing in the most promising players in sort of the most promising props, hookers, locks to really solidify that area of the game. And it was really interesting to hear them talk about how it was. I asked specifically, is this a reaction to what the talent that's coming through to senior level and how that's getting ready through Premiership games, and sort of being at what point is it available to national coaches? And they were saying no, it wasn't. It's more a reaction to how age group coaching has gone and how there was a dictatorial sort of side of coaching, and that evolved into sort of a lot of small-sided games, and then they were just wondering whether those small-sided games were really getting the most out of developing these set-piece skills in the best way possible. So the RFU are on it. If you think of sort of who's around in the piece you mentioned earlier, Colsey, I've mentioned Joe Hayes, 24 years old, already 125 first-team games for Leicester Tigers, which is absolutely mad. There's on the loosehead side, Finn Baxter at Harlequins is just one guy. Obviously, in those two cases, Hayes and Baxter, they're being mentored by Dan Cole and Joe Marler at club level for the foreseeable future. So that's a huge boost, and England have got to make the most of those networks. Maybe something that is being overlooked in all of this, and which, shout out to Charles, he mentioned bang on at the time, was that England got pushed off. They didn't concede a penalty, but they got pushed off a scrum as Nche arrived in the 52nd minute, 53rd minute, something like that. Didn't concede a penalty though. And at that point, George Martin went off, and he'd been scrummaging behind Dan Cole. And obviously, big old boy, was seriously impressive, and kind of glad that we gave him the big raps in the preview pod. He sort of delivered on that, didn't he? But that was another factor. So it's the whole Type 5, and that just goes to show, doesn't it? You've just got to be stable in that area the whole time. England weren't stable at the beginning of the 2019 World Cup final, and they paid for it. They weren't stable at the end of the 2023 World Cup semi-final, and they paid for it again.
What I can't quite comprehend is Ellis Genge and Carl Sinclair are good scrummagers. I think I've seen a lot this week about throwing them under the bus and saying they're not technically good and technically sound scrummagers. They are. So I'm not sure if it just was maybe Genge has not come off the bench very often in this tournament, and that's a slightly different sort of frame of mind you've got to be in to scrummage, and maybe that went against him a little bit. I'm not sure, because his scrummaging has improved so much. Like whenever England have played Ireland over the past couple of years, he's really had Furlong on the ropes. And you think of that game in the 2022 Six Nations where Charlie Ewels was sent off, England sort of had a 7+1 pack almost, and he really had Furlong on the ropes. So he's not a bad scrummager, but he did get it wrong last week, and he was under a lot of pressure from Vincent Koch, who's not as good a scrummager as Franz Malherbe. So I don't know. I mean, I still think that final penalty that decided the game was incredibly harsh, especially as a match deciding decision. But there were a couple of others that were absolute stonewall bankers. So England can't really have too many complaints about the final penalty when that was the way that the wind was blowing anyway. I think in ideal circumstances, Ben O'Keefe would have reset, and then it probably would have ended up with a South Africa penalty anyway. So there's not really many complaints that England can have. But yeah, I just found that Sinclair got incredibly long-legged. I don't know if if that was due to how short Oxenchae is and the angle that he was going in on. But yeah, it seemed completely different to the scrummaging picture that Joe Marler and Dan Cole were painting earlier in the game.
You mentioned the way the wind was blowing there, Charles. Isn't that the key of it? That it was sort of a narrative that was just going towards a quite inevitable conclusion. They'd forced a penalty even before they repeated the trick of they had two marks, didn't they? And the first one they really weighed up. South Africa really weighed up, calling for the scrum again. And the second one they did, and England sort of locked it out. But you just felt that there was another kind of dominant shove in them, and that's the whole kind of and the reverse was happening at the beginning of the game, because Cole and Marler were painting these good pictures and setting the narrative that no, we're always legal, we're strong under this. And you wonder whether that 52nd minute scrum actually with Cole still on the field was the one that changed things. And although, as we said, England didn't actually infringe at that set the tone of, right, okay, the back end of this game is only going one way. And that's, as we keep saying, referees are human. That's sort of the way these momentum swings work.
I think the one that was incredibly unfair was that one on the line where Farrell had put the kick through, Kurt Lorenza had spilled, and at that point that felt like another key moment in the game. In fact, at that point I thought that England were going to push on from there and win. Maybe not score a try, but I thought Farrell might drop another 3 points. And then that one did seem unfair because Sinclair did stay very, very straight. He went backwards, and that's not a penalty. Going backwards at the scrum is not a penalisable offence. And he stayed very straight and then just went again quite straight. And I thought that was incredibly harsh, and that felt again like a turning point in the game. And also just linked to this, what a cruel twist of fate that the match-winning 3 points came from a shanked Freddie Stewart, Gary Owen and spill that led to the scrum with the penalty when he was exquisite all game, magnificent all game. His first error came in the 77th, 78th minute, and it cost is probably a little bit too strong, but it certainly led to the match-winning penalty, which was just incredibly cruel.